Well, hi, it's Sandy with Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. One of my really great subscribers had seen me when I put my pumpkins together, and she asked if I would do a video that was start to finish using my Addi Knitting Machine and every single step that I do to make a pumpkin. So Stella, here's your video. First thing to do is pick out your yarn. I love this yarn, comes from Hobby Lobby. I love it. I got this on the clearance rack for only $1.29. And so we're gonna pull from the center of the yarn skein. We want our very first black key up, and we want it marked at 0 so we don't have any rows. And so we're gonna have a little bit of a tail that we're gonna throw into the center, and we're gonna crank it so that first one goes down. I have this hooked onto just a stool. We're going to skip the second one and go on to the third one. Skip the next one and go on to the fifth one. And so here it is on the side. So you're letting it go all the way down. Then you're going to take your yarn across the back of that next one and then hit the one after that. And we're just going to go all the way around. Now, when we get back to that very first key again, we're going to put it in our little lock. And so when we crank, it's going to go from 0 rows to 1 row. And we just want to make sure that it's catching on everything, and those very first couple stitches are really important. And so you just want to make sure that it's catching. So that's going back behind on that little red knob. If it doesn't on those first couple ones, you want to do it yourself. But after that, it should do it all by itself. Now the second row that you're doing, there's a little bit more tension than there is when you get to the third and all the rows after that. So the crank is a little bit harder, but it's just because it's making those very first stitches. If it looks like it skipped that very first black one, just pull it over top of it before it locks it again. And then it's really easy. You just take the crank and you're just cranking it along. Now I'm standing next to it, and usually I sit and I put my feet on the stool, and so it makes it really easy. But I wanted to show you from a few different angles of what it looks like that it's doing. The side angles and from the top, and it's just a continuous crank. You want to make sure the tension is staying about the same. And you can see that is the outside of your pumpkin, those beautiful ribbed colors. Because what you're seeing first is the inside. Now here it is slow motion, and see how those keys just grab the yarn. And we want to get 55 rows. And when we get to 55, then it's time that we're going to cast off. Now there's always on the Addi King 3 black keys and hooks, whatever you'd like to call them. I call them keys. And so I make sure that very first one is down, and then I'm going to grab about 2 lengths, arm lengths of yarn, and I'm going to cut it. With the Addi King, you get these little red needles, and see how they curve up? And this is really great for when you're casting off on whatever you're making on your Addi knitting machine. And so remember, my first black one is down, and so I'm going to cast off on the second black one. And so you're going to pull it through, and the yarn is really long, and so you want to make sure that it doesn't get tangled up on anything, which it wants to because it's really long. And so you're going to pull it all the way through, and the very first 2 or 3 to 4 stitches, you only want to do one at a time. After that, you can start grabbing more stitches as it starts to have less tensioning, and it's easy to pull away. And you just want to be careful. One stitch at a time, you grab it and start pulling it through. And so we're going to go all the way around and grab all of the yarn. We're going to cast everything off. Now when we get to the very end, I always like to make sure that when I'm grabbing that, I'm using my pointer finger so that nothing is slipping back off where I might lose a stitch. And then we have the very last, and then it's off of the Addi knitting machine. And then you can really see the beautiful colors that your pumpkin is going to be. And I just love all that mixture of color in there. And so then we're going to just go over to my dining room table to put it all together. Now the things that we need of course our yarn that we knitted, a knitting needle, fabric, whatever you can use for your stem, your leaf. I like to use upholstery needles, and I'll show you how I use those. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to tie up the bottom of the pumpkin, and we're using the very shortest tail that we have, which would have been at the very beginning, that when we started our pumpkin. And it's just a matter of pulling it, and the tail gets a lot longer of course because you're closing that all up. And I still have my red needle on the other tail, so I'm going to just take a blue plastic needle, and they're basically the same size. They have a big eye, and so it's easy to send the yarn through. And I do want to make sure this is really secure, and so I'm just going through making it the closure, and I'm going to do a few knots in there so that it doesn't unravel at any time. Now at this point, a lot of people will just hide that tail, but I always keep it. Now I'm going to send that knitting needle through there, and the reason why I do that is I am going to push all of that fiber that we're using, that batting, around that needle. And it makes it really easy when we go to do the ribs. I like to pull it apart and just stuff it around that knitting needle. And the knitting needle helps it to stand up. And I'm just going to keep filling that fiber until I think it's a good size and shape of a ball. And then we can just take the knitting needle out. It pulls out really easy. And we're going to close up that top part, and it's just pulling that string. It wants to go back onto itself, so you just have to work with it. And then I'm going to just crunch it around a little bit. I want it really even, and so that my pumpkin will be a good shape. And sometimes if you have it bound up a little bit, you can fix that by just squeezing it and moving it around inside. So then we're going to do a knot on the top also. And after I have that pulled as tight as I want, I am actually going to close that up. And remember, we still do have our red little needle on this tail. And so we can take it and we'll grab a few stitches, and we're just going to make sure that we make it secure up there. Now remember, we left that tail long down on the bottom, so be careful that it doesn't get all twisted up. Just untwine it if it does, and we are just going to do a few more stitches, and then we'll put a knot in there so that it stays. And I like to have this closed up really actually pretty tight, because we're going to use that upholstery needle, so it'll just go through it very easily. So we're going to take that red needle off, and I have a variety of sizes of upholstery needles, and I always want to pick one that will go completely through without me squishing the pumpkin. So we're going to pick that second smallest one based on the size of our pumpkin. Now these are extremely sharp. They do have a nice eye, so it's easy to get yarn through there, but be very careful with it. Now at this point, our tail is really long, and so it's easy to get it tangled up or twisted in with the bottom tail. So just be careful with that. But we're going to go right in the center, and it just goes through like butter. It is just so easy. You're not fighting with it, and that's why I like to use the upholstery needle. And this is making our very first rib. Now on my pumpkins, I like 8 ribs. So I first go on one side, then go to the opposite side, so it's dividing the pumpkin in half. And see how I'm just pulling that tight. And as I work, I can move those ribs if they're not quite even. It makes it really easy. So I look at it, I see what, if I need to move it down or move it up, and I'm just pulling that tight. Then we're going to go actually the opposite. But see, I'm going to adjust that just a little bit before I go any further. Then we're going to go the opposite way. So we're going to divide 1/2 of the pumpkin again. So by the time we get done with these two, we have 4 sections in our pumpkin. Now I know a lot of people just do 4 sections, but I like 8. I think it gives it a really great look on a pumpkin, and I just want to keep always having my yarn very taut. And with that upholstery needle, even though we get more and more through the top and the bottom, it just goes through so easily, so much easier than if I'm using one of those little plastic needles. So we're almost ready. We got to get a couple more ribs, and I'm always checking to make sure the ribs are the sizes that I want to. If I need to adjust, it's so easy at this point. But it's really looking nice, and I have a lot of yarn, so I'm actually going to go through and do those same ribs one more time so they're just a little more secure. If you don't have quite enough, you can always use your bottom yarn that we kept. I'm going to make sure that both of the yarns get all the way to the top when I'm done, and I'm going to tie those in a couple knots because it's time to put my stem on. Now you can use a lot of things to make stems. You can crochet something, you can use a piece of wood, you could just add leaves and have no stem that you actually see. But I like this material that looks like leather. And so I'm going to use my hole punches, and I'm just going to make 2 holes because I'm going to send my yarn, my 2 strands of yarn, through that to secure it. And so I'm just going to do a hole on this side and then switch and do a hole on the other side. And my upholstery needle is too long, so I'm going to go back to either your red needle or your blue needle. And I am just going to make it so that it threads right through, and I'm using both strands, the top and the bottom. And I will grab a couple pieces or a couple stitches of yarn to secure it, and then we'll go back and forth a couple times. But see how you can just grab a couple pieces and then pull it taut, so it actually kind of locks it in there. And then we'll go through those holes because there's plenty of room and grab a few stitches on the other side again. Because I don't want the stem ever to get pulled out. Maybe kids are playing with the pumpkin and I would hate to have it get pulled out and they would have to fix it. And then after I get it secure, I'm going to hide it in the pumpkin. So I'm just going to push it through the fiber and then out into one of the ribs. See how I can just pull that? And as I pull it taut, you can take your scissors, and I was using the pinking scissors, shears, so I am just going to use those. Let me grab them, and we can just, because it's taut, we can just clip those off. Now I like to put leaves on my pumpkin, so I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue, and I don't want to put the glue onto the yarn. So I'm going to slip it in between my stem and then press it to hold it. And it just takes seconds, and it makes a perfect little pumpkin. Thank you so much, Stella. And as always, like, subscribe, share with the world. Give me a thumbs up. It helps me with my YouTube channel. And Stella, since you asked me to do this video, I am going to send this to you. So everyone, I hope you have a wonderful fall. It's almost September. And one more thing. To my son-in-law, happy birthday, Jamie. I'll see you next time.